Welcome to the Big Screen Symposium podcast. The Big Screen Symposium was held in Auckland at the Victory Events Centre on the 5th and 6th of April 2024. This session features three leading screenwriters, Lulu, Wang, Dianne Taylor, and Michael Bennett, as they share their thoughts, insights, and experiences writing for film and TV. The talk was moderated by Marc Laureano and presented by South Pacific Pictures.
Tēnā koutou katoa, nā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, ko Marc Laureano, tōku ingoa. I have the great pleasure of moderating today's session. And the word moderate actually comes here. When I think about that, it means really just facilitating and hopefully standing back as you guys provide us with the ideas and the insights that everybody's come to expect. Our session today is called Writing Methodology, and we know that writing comes from a deeply human place. And as individuals with our own experiences, we bring kind of diverse approaches to the process of creation and putting ideas into words. And so what we have here is a fantastic panel, as I'm sure you know, of deeply human, empathetic, intelligent, thoughtful people. And so part of today's session will be asking you for your patai, and that's the app. So please feel free throughout the session. If anything spoken up here prompts you to ask a question, we'd love to receive it and incorporate that as part of this one. So Dianne Taylor, Lulu Wang, Michael Bennett, welcome indeed. I want to start with the impulse to write. A lot of people want to become writers, and then they learn the skill to become writers. But before they do that, they kind of have this need to create. Can you tell us about where your impulse to write comes from? I'll start with you, Michael.
Oh, I was hoping I'd be at the end of the row, Mark. Sort of
well,
think about a really intelligent answer. Kia ora koutou, tēnei te mihi nui kia koutou. It's a real honour and a pleasure to be here, and an honour to be on stage with all of you. So I guess I kind of always knew I wanted to be a writer, and a really formative thing for me, I guess, was that my mum was an amazing writer. I was a bit of an afterthought. I was 5 years after all the rest of my family. She could spend an immense amount of time with me. We used to do really dicky things like test each other on a page of the dictionary, who would know the most words in the page of the dictionary. My mum met my dad because she was writing a biography of his dad, who was the first Māori bishop of Aotearoa. So I kind of got the love of words from my mum, and I got, I guess, my dad was a Spitfire pilot. He was one of 7 brothers who went to World War II. I guess I got a passion for fighting the fights that matter from my dad, and I think those two things came together in an impulse to be a writer of some sort. In terms of a formative kind of moment where that became tangible, as a 10-year-old, my brother brought back his new girlfriend from university in Canterbury, and they brought back, he was doing psychology, and Tui, his new partner, his new girlfriend, was doing English literature, and he brought back the abnormal textbook of psychology, and she brought back In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. And I kind of stole both of those books as a 10-year-old. God knows what they were thinking, allowing me to, and spent the holidays just reading them cover to cover. And when they went back to university, I hid them and kept them. And it was, I guess, those two books, like Truman Capote to this day is like, that taught me everything about visual storytelling. Even though it's a novel, just read it and you understand. And Abnormal Psychology, the textbook, I guess, gave me this real passion for wanting to understand why we do the glorious things that we do as human beings and why we do the terrible things that we do as human beings. So I guess that made a bit of a direction in what I'd come to write about later in life. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Dan, would you like to tell us? Yeah.
Sure. One of my earliest memories is being at school and barely able to write, probably about 6 or 7, and being asked to write a story about, I don't know, what we did on the weekend or something like that. And I remember actually crawling under the desk and going into almost a fetal position like that. I feel like that's
In the classroom.
In the classroom, yeah. And I feel like that's what I've been doing the rest of my life. Hunkering
A good
down.
position helps with your writing.
You know, I now have an ergonomic chair, but still preferred position might be, you know, fetal position. Yeah, so I wrote. I went into advertising as a copywriter when I was 18. I don't know how you wouldn't be able to do that these days, I don't think. But and in retrospect, it wasn't a bad thing to do because I was writing every single day, putting words on a page and writing a lot of TV commercials. So I did sort of come in through that. But it's a big transition from that, which is all about compression, you know, down to 30 seconds or 60 seconds, and then learning how to dig much deeper and learning, you know, to dig into character. So it's been for me from that sort of tight commercial focus about, you know, relearning how to write and how to dig deeper.
Fantastic.
But yeah, it's always been. I've always made my living as a writer in some form.
Excellent. Lulu.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, Michael, you know, I think a lot about that one line from Capote, at least from the movie, where he says, Capote says, he walked out the front door. It's like we grew up in the same house, and while he walked out the front door, while I walked out the front door, he walked out the back door.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So I think about that phrase a lot in my writing, because it not only speaks to character and circumstances, but also to empathy and being able to recognize that we're the same. But yeah, similar to both of you, I started writing pretty young. My family was a big influence. My mother's a writer. And I think I started journaling when I was in 6th grade. Somebody bought me a journal for my birthday, like a pink one with a lock on it. And, you know, every entry started out with Dear Diary. And it was my way of really just complaining about my parents. Secretly. And then I remember one summer, my grandfather read my journal and I was mortified. And he said, but the writing is really good. But why did you say these things about me? And I guess that's kind of defined my life, because now I make films and my parents are good for you on the success, but you misrepresented our family. So yeah, and I've always written in a nonfiction way, but it took me a really long time before I was, I think, courageous enough to venture into fiction.
Absolutely. Okay. And so it's clear that everybody had a kind of deep connection to language, and it's some sort of way of expressing. From writing diaries, writing copy, how did we transition to writing for the screen, which is a different kind of writing? Certainly the language relies on these words, but the conception of the product is different. So can you speak to when you started really having a consciousness about writing for a visual medium? I'll start with you, Lulu.
I mean, I think I made my first feature and even then I didn't really realize I was writing for a visual medium. A lot of the films I had seen in college, I didn't go to film school, but I took a film 101 class. And at the time, I just took it as an elective, and I was mostly I had actually gotten into law school and thought that I was going to be Ally McBeal or something. And which is why I moved to Boston. And a lot of the films that I was watching at the time were very dialogue-driven, like screwball romantic comedies, Woody Allen, you know, a lot of like these New York films that are, I guess like a lot of the things that were influential on me during that time were dialogue-driven. And so I didn't necessarily think, I knew people said show, don't tell, you know, it's a visual medium, but I didn't really understand that conceptually until after that film, and I was working on my next film. And then I thought, I need to figure out, like, as a writer who doesn't have a film background, what that actually means, writing visually, and what is a visual language. I started studying photography a lot and just watching a lot of films and watching the behind the scenes, like the director's commentary. So a lot of that was self-taught.
Fantastic. Michael, how about you?
Yeah. I I kind of knew that I wanted to write. I was brought up in a very small one-horse town in the South Island. We didn't even have a horse. It was really small. And I kind of had this idea that I wanted to write, but my only frame of reference was paid writers are probably journalists, and I didn't really want to deal with facts, and so I kind of let that be. And so I ended up doing a first degree in psychology, which still to this day sort of feels to me like the best training I had for what I do. But then really figured out really don't have the human kind of facilities to be a counsellor, or so kind of really went back to writing and wanted to figure out what kind of writing would work for me. And I guess got lucky that I did this kind of a multimedia 5-day course. There's a little bit about documentary making, a little bit about videography. And then the screenwriter came and talked to us. And she talked about how her job was to explore human psychology and behavior through images. And it was just like 10 minutes into her talk, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And yeah, it's just a lucky moment.
Dianne, I first encountered your work through your short stories, which have these characters with great interior lives. Could you speak about how you transitioned from writing prose in that way to your work as a screenwriter?
I can't believe that you actually, first encountered my work through short stories, because I only wrote about 3. And yeah, I met Marc at university. I was there as a mature student of 32. I thought I was so old. And we met doing Shuichi Katari's screenwriting paper. It was the first year it had been run. And there was a lot of people that went on to do some great stuff, Roseanne Liang included. So I think, I had been writing script before that, which I'd come into through working with commercials directors who were also directing film. But I didn't really know what I was doing. And so doing that paper helped a great deal. But really, it was a question of jumping in and doing it. I think I learned by doing it, to be honest. Going to every talk, to everything, like this. Anyone that came and visited and talked about screenwriting, read all the books, learned all about structure, and then found it a bit confusing. And and then sort of threw that out and, not throw it out, it sits there. You learn that stuff, it's good. But then I think you need to let go of it too a little bit, and just run with a story that's basically not boring.
Indeed.
Save the cat.
Sorry?
Save
the cat.
Save the cat.
Save the cat. Yep. I've still got Save the Cat. I still go to Save the Cat, because you can run for so long just thinking this is great, this is working, but at times you need to test it. And I will take out Save the Cat sometimes and just read it and go, yeah, okay, that's not working because I'm not, I've missed something back here. But it's not a Bible, but it's a good reference book.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people develop as artists, you have that first I copy and then I make it my own at some point, where you have a kind of frame of reference. And so all the McKees, all the William Goldmans, all the kind of writing books exist as provocations in some way for you to test your own kind of method. And so speaking of that, we learn these things either formally, or we're autodidacts and we learn and we gather on that own. Now that we've kind of started getting these skills, I guess a lot of people would want to know, well, how do you initiate a project? How do you know? Where do you gather ideas? What animates or fuels your prompt for yourself to say, I'm going to start this project now. Could you tell us about how you generate these projects? Michael, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. I have this thing called the Book of Bubbles, which is it's kind of a journal I've been keeping ever since I kind of realized this is kind of what I want to do in my life. And it's literally like a kid's scrapbook. And it's not one, it's like dozens and dozens now because 30 years or something. And the Book of Bubbles is this kind of, for me, it's a treasure chest, a way of like keeping hold of stuff that I don't know what to do with right now, but I think might be important. So, as an example, like, like one bubble in my Book of Bubbles is, it could be lines of dialogue, it could be something I've seen, it could be a clipping from a newspaper, whatever. And if it's something that, I sort of feel like, that's worth remembering. So maybe you pass someone in a supermarket and you hear them saying, she loves me so good, but hurts me so bad, or whatever. And I don't know where that's going to fit anywhere, but like
straight to the dad.
So I go home to the Book of Bubbles and write that line of dialogue, and then put a bubble around it. And the reason I put a bubble around it is that I want it to be free floating, literally. Like I want that line of dialogue from book 14 to, it might organically meet up with an image from book 3, and it's kind of like, and also it's a dream diary. Like I keep it by the bed and just keep this sort of wealth of stuff, and eventually kind of like sparks happen between 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 things, and they start to connections start to emerge, or if I've heard another story that I've started to think about as a potential feature film or a novel or whatever, then I'll go delving into the Book of Bubbles to try and see, is there something that can inform this nascent embryo of an idea? So I guess it's a way of like, the brain works in really weird ways, like, things get their hooks into you for unknown reasons, and you don't fight that. Like but if you don't record it somewhere, it'll go away. So it's a way of keeping hold of that stuff. Yeah.
I have a similar thing, and I always wish that I could have physical books, because I hate being that person being like, I put it in my phone. But I always have my phone with me, so I use Evernote.
Right.
And I do the same thing. The one good thing about, I guess, is because I lose all my stuff all the time. I'm always like misplacing things. But in Evernote, I can go and search. Like I'll do like little hashtag. Anyways, sorry, I don't want to get into the technology. But yes, I do a similar thing, and I collect a lot of ideas. But similarly, I collect a lot of ideas, and I actually think if you really like look at my script, I used to be told when I was making short films and writing scripts that I was trying to do too much. Like you're this story, figure out what it's about. You're trying to tell you're making it about too many things. No, I don't think I fixed that problem. I still think that like my stories tend to be about like many things. And my mom studied philosophy, and she would always read philosophy to me growing up. And so that was my education into storytelling, was that asking questions, not necessarily questions that you have to answer through a story. I don't think that the purpose of a story is to answer a question, but just to interrogate that question and bring it up. And so it always has to, if something's a fun story, I'm like, oh, that's cool, that's fun, that's a great world. But if it's not asking something deeper that really intrigues me, I'm not going to do that story. Whereas another story that could be 2 people in a room talking, but there's something really interesting that we're interrogating there, then that inspires. So that's where I always start. And that's what gets me to say, okay, yes, I think it's worth going down the road with this project. And then I start to fill in the details. I think it's important to have some knowledge like of structure as a basis, but that's, I think, in a way, a lot of people, that's what schools teach you. The thing that took me a long time to learn was actually to figure out a way to collect all of my dreams and ideas and how to listen to intuition, because that's actually what makes the project more than, it makes it leap off the page. It makes it unique. It makes it magical. It makes it connected to not just you telling a story, but you as a channel for something greater.
Wonderful.
For me, I mean, the idea can come from anywhere. I mean, my 2 feature films, in a sense, have started with place, which is strange in a way. Just places that I'm attracted to and have formulated stories around that place. And it was a question of going to those places, absorbing, researching, and finding stories that sat within those places.
Yes. And so your 2 feature films, the first one was set in Otahu and the other one was set in India.
In India, in the sort of foothills of the Himalayas. Yes. So
can you talk about, like, you visiting that place and
the first one I co-wrote with Shuchi, and that came out of her doing a food documentary in Otahu. And she
A Taste of Place.
A Taste of Place, yeah. And she said, this would be a great place to set a feature film. It's like, well, that's not an idea. It's just a place. So we went and just, we would go out there and just walk around the shops and sit in little Indian diners and watch people. And there was a woman who ran a fancy cake shop there. And we just dreamt what their lives might be. We took people that we saw, and we kind of invented characters around what they were doing, and then it became a sort of a dual narrative that followed an Indian and a Pākehā family. So it brought both of our whole backgrounds into the characters, and it became a story about mothers and sons. So that was that one. With Beyond the Known World, I had travelled to Himachal Pradesh when I was 21 and fallen in love with the place. And then I was thinking about a story about a child that goes missing and the parents have to look for the child, and it was going to be set in New Zealand. But it was just wasn't even down on the page. And then I started researching missing people, and I discovered that in Kulu in India, a lot of people had gone missing, young people. And so that triggered me because I knew the area. And so I went up to India with my daughter, who was 17 at the time, and we researched. We talked to the superintendent of police at the Kulu district police station. We visited the New Zealand embassy in Delhi and talked, about process of what happens. And we just spent, a few weeks up there and went around. And I actually found locations that ended up being in the film. Yeah, certain houses and pathways and things. And I built the story around really what I found there.
Like specifically streets, and it would just...
Yeah, like villages. And, there was one house in particular where I had a character who was a drug dealer living. It turned out that was the house where the drug dealer actually did live in that village. And we ended up using it. I think she was in prison at the time. But it was bizarre, So there was a blend of, yeah.
So what I'm getting from all of this is, firstly, you seem to be really fantastic observers, ready to kind of magpie observations, details, and then record them somehow. And then from that, allow that to percolate, and then interrogate for whether or not this is something where a story might live. Fantastic. As we go through that, say we're initiating a script and we're writing for our own pleasure. In an earlier session, we were reminded of the fact that when we write, we are our first audience, and therefore, is this something that will find interest? I can find interest in myself. I want to talk slightly about your practice as a writer and the concept of voice and your voice as a writer. You all have different backgrounds, and some people interpret voice as a point of view. Some people refer to voice as a style. I would like to know in the process, to what extent are you conscious of your voice when you're writing? Is it something that you develop and then apply, or is it coming out of just reflex and authenticity?
When I was writing fiction, I just didn't like my voice. I just thought it was dumb. It just, and I think one of the reasons for, writing screenwriting is that I felt that I could drop into other people's voices. For me, it was a medium that works. I can actually leave my voice behind a little bit and, through character, find another. I suppose, though, as writers, we do develop a voice, a way, but that's more a way of writing or an approach to dialogue and I just don't know where that comes from. I don't know. I mean, to me, every project's a little different. But yeah, I guess you've got to inhabit the character. And I think, with After the Party, that came through sitting and talking with Robin for so long before we wrote anything. And so the voice of Penny sort of developed in a sense before the story did.
Right.
Yeah, but then I think.
Michael, would you like?
Yeah. I mean, I sort of feel like as a writer, I'm a vampire. I've always kind of thought a real tangible example was in my first novel, one character's, I won't be shy about it because it's kind of quite obvious if you read the book, is my daughter. A radical young Māori woman, talented performer, and when Matariki read the book, so I went down to describing the tattoos on Matariki's arm, which offended and they're slightly lopsided. And I described that in the book. And Matariki read it and said, "Oh, you've just crossed the line there, Dad. It was just a little bit too far." But, I mean, for instance, I did a lot of work on Taina Porter's story and got very involved with his world. And another kind of like example of kind of why I think you have to just embrace being a vampire because it's what we are. When Taina was exonerated, he was at our house when the result came back from the Privy Council, and he was sitting in the backyard with my girlfriend Jane. And it was late at night and he'd had a few beers. And so Lulu, sorry, this is a young Māori man who was in prison for 21 years for a crime he didn't commit, and he was eventually exonerated. And he was sitting with Jane and he just took a moment and he said, when I was in that place, which is Pāremoremo prison, he's got a daughter who by that stage was 21 years old. When I was in that place, I only had half a heart. Chanel, his daughter, only had half a heart. Now we have a whole heart and nothing's going to change that. Which was just like, a writer cannot write that dialogue, like literally.
In the book.
So Jane told me and she was crying, and then eventually a year later we were making a film and I said, we've just got to use it. Like, I know that this was a personal moment between you and Taina, like the most personal moment possible, but we've got to use it. Like, we can't not. And the beautiful thing about that was that Taina wrote the last line of his own film, which is kind of beautiful. So, I mean, for me personally, like, I think we inhabit other people in what we do, but my voice, I think, comes from the stuff that, like, the thematics behind my storytelling. It's not what I think about, it just naturally bubbles forth into what I'm writing. I can't help it, and I don't plan it. Like, I don't plan a feature film or a TV series based on theme, but because of who you are, you can't help write about the things that are important.
So understanding a strong sense of self, I think, is crucial. Lulu?
Yeah, I think that definitely being a vampire, and that, like, I watched a lot of things as I was Because, in Hollywood, they're like, you have to find your voice. So it's like, all right, I'm going to go find my voice.
Yeah.
And so I would watch a lot of things and then write about what I liked and then try to like decipher why I liked them. Because there's great movies that I really like, but I don't necessarily go like, I wish I had made that. And then there's films that you're like, that was so interesting. That's something I wish I had made. And then why? Why is that, right? Why can you love a film but not feel like you should have made it or wish you could have made it? And so, I was like, oh, I really like when things balance comedy and drama. Okay, check. That may be part of my voice because my parents are funny. So I really kind of like broke it down. I realized I love Scandinavian films. There's such a dark sense of humor. There's a lot of Northern European films. So British films, so I just kind of studied it that way. But I think for me, my voice also came out of the fact that so many other people growing up, as an immigrant in America were telling me what my voice should be or couldn't be, that I had to spend most of my life like navigating that by the time I finally got to make a movie, I had to really I was very aware of who I was within the culture and who they didn't want me to be or what didn't work financially. And so I had to have a keen sense of like what I was fighting for, what was me, what was compromising to fit with the industry. And it was seen as I think for me, it was a weakness or it was a challenge, for many, many years as I was trying to tell stories and make films. But now I see it as an asset. I go, oh, okay, the thing that makes me different is actually the thing I should lean into and be part of my voice. And so it's a question I always ask when I take on a project, which is why this story? Why now? And why am I the one to tell it? And sometimes it's a great story and I go, but I'm not the one to tell it. I think this is great, but that filmmaker should tell it. Maybe I'll produce it, but they should write it. Or maybe I'll direct it if they're willing to, and so that's something that I'm always negotiating.
That's fantastic. And actually resonant to an earlier session preceding this one around stories and how we might understand whether or not should we be the one writing that story or should I empower other people who have rights to that story. Thank you so much. Let's go into the nuts and bolts. And we now have these ideas. We have something that we're interested in, something that inspires us. Can we talk through just the process of, here we go. How do I begin? Some people, they like to write a full structure and some people like the process of discovery. Can you speak to your own processes about getting the outline or get something done that says, yep, worth pursuing? Michael, let's start with you.
Yeah. So I guess for me, I have really developed quite a strong process that I don't veer from very much. And I was thinking about it leading up to the session, and to me, an image that kept coming back in my mind was Simone Biles at the 2021. This will make sense eventually. Olympics. The goat of all goats, the greatest female gymnast that's ever lived. At her last Olympics, going to come home with all of the gold medals around her neck. She steps up to the first vault. She does the run up to the vault that she's done 10,000 times. She hits the springboard, goes into the air. She's done it 10,000 times. She wraps her arms in close so that she can start rotating at 180, like a washing machine, gets up into the air and she loses her mind. She's done it 10,000 times, but she doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know where her butt is, where her head is. She turns from being the goat of all goats to being this lost kitten falling off a third-story balcony. And she lands really badly and walks out and leaves the Olympic vault competition. She got the gyps, and we as writers get the gyps. We just call it something else. We call it writer's block or imposter syndrome. Or so I got sick of getting the gyps, and so I've got a process that I kind of rely upon, so I don't become the lost kitten falling off the third floor balcony. So for me, what it is kind of like, 100 pages of a screenplay is really scary. It's like, so I don't aim for 100 pages of a screenplay. I kind of divide up my process into manageable chunks. And the first manageable chunk for me is that kind of comes from the Book of Bubbles and comes from when things start to formulate. And I spend an immense amount of time putting things up on the wall and, putting images up on the wall that seem relevant, newspaper clippings, like maybe character ideas and little arcs. And I use the wall for as long as possible. And it gets to a certain point where, because I'm the swotty one in this group, Mark suggested we could bring some images. So I've got an image to show. What it ends up looking a bit like at that part of the process is like when you walk into in the movies, in a serial killer movie, when you walk into the room, that's what my office looks like at this first part of the process. And for me, what that does is it takes all the stress away. I'm not worried about 100 pages. I'm just exploring, entirely relying on the right-hand side of the cranium, of the brain hemisphere, and exploring stuff and not knowing where it's going to go. But eventually stuff starts to emerge, connections start to, and you start to feel like maybe this is a good start and maybe this is a middle. And so the disorganized serial killer sort of then turns into a slightly more organized serial killer that's got like maybe a beginning and a middle and, a bit of structure in there. And just all those images have gone onto 3-inch by 4-inch cards, and with blue text so you can move them around. And I know that eventually I'm aiming for, like, if it's a feature film, like pretty much always it ends up being 30 to 40 major sequences for me. It just does. So I know that I'm looking for 30 or 40 sequences eventually. But at this stage, it's still experimenting. And so the right side of the brain is starting to move to the more organized left side. And eventually where I get to is like that. But without writing a word of anything on my laptop, going nowhere near the laptop. And this could be 2 months, this could be 5 months. But for me, it's like, I want to get to a place where I know what the story is, I know what the turning points are, I know what the character arcs are, so that I'm not worried about story when I'm writing. All I'm worried is about writing beautiful scenes and images and dialogue that feels good and truthful and real, and not worrying about what the connective tissue is. That, I've done all that other work up on the wall, and and that makes me try. It feels like I mostly avoid the gyps now.
Fantastic. Lulu.
Yeah, pretty similar. I think, I still get the gyps, and I feel like every time I approach a new project, I have to reinvent my process because I feel like I don't know how to do this. And like on the farewell, I wrote so many bad versions of the script that I got really scared and just felt like I didn't know how to do it. And then I wrote short story. So I thought, well, maybe the best way to explore my own psyche is to just like write it where I'm not scared of like, how do I write a film? And so now I have a similar thing, but the way I think about it, I'm not writing a short story, but I do a similar thing to you where I put all of the ideas. And the way I think about it is, someone explained it to me one time, is that there's a process in which you're like a sculptor and you have to create the clay first before you can start sculpting. Because that's where I get tripped up, is on the first draft. I face the blank page. I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Oh, this is terrible. Those first 10 pages, start over. So I think it's really important to do exactly what you're saying, is to put all of the ideas and have your clay and have a general sketch of, how you're going to put the clay into this sculpture, into this form. And then just know that the majority of the work is chiseling, right? You're not going to form the sculpture at your first pass. And so write down your dreams, write down any image, take walks, spend time. And I think the biggest disservice sometimes is when you don't have the time, when they're like, all right, go write this thing. You got 2 weeks, we want a first draft. And I don't know how to create that way. At least not yet.
I think with my feature films, I've possibly been a bit more ordered than I've been in writing After the Party. And I think it was just a totally different process. I mean, your layout with the bits of string, it's a little bit like mine, but mine would be after the cat had actually attacked it. And it was still sitting in my head in that form. So it's stuff that's just all over the place. I keep always notebooks, and I just I never go to the laptop early on, because I find that quite stymieing. I find I have to write notes, and I keep it with me a lot of the time so that, when things come, I can get stuff down. And it just takes me forever to discover what it actually is that I'm wanting to write about. It used to really bother me when a draft or a two drafts, some people would say, what is the theme? I've got no idea. Now I've sort of learned that for me, I'm not someone who can go, I want to write on this theme, and therefore I'm going to explore it in this way or that way. It's a much more organic and very unordered process, actually. And then I will discover what the theme is. It will suddenly go, and it's usually something that I've written on before. It just keeps, I think we keep writing deep down over the same material. A lot of the times, the stuff that really sits deep inside us, it might be about mother-daughter relationships, or it might be about father-son, or it's, but it's something that sits deep in us that we're needing to explore at a deep level. And I'll go, damn, I'm writing about that again. I thought I'd got that out of my system, but it's come back in another form.
Right.
So I think the biggest thing that you can give yourself is time. I mean, I can't rush it. I think once I'm done with all of that, I can write quite quickly when I need to. When there's a deadline, yes, I can write quite quickly. But I need a lot of time at the front for stuff to swim around. And I should talk perhaps a little bit about After the Party, because it was a very, very different process.
Yes, I was going to talk about, with the remaining time we have left, I wanted to touch on collaboration, because someone once said that you're mostly working alone with just the characters in your head for company. That is the plight of the writer. But then you now venture into something like a series where you have to work with other people, or you have chosen to work with a team of people. Can you speak to that kind of writing method when the circumstances have changed from a solitary activity? Can I start with you first, Lulu?
Yeah, I love it. It was just like such a relief to not be stuck in my own head. I know not everyone likes it. I think it also just depends on the chemistry of the people that you're working with. But we had a room there was 5 of us, and, I could just say the bad idea that, I think that I do this like mental gymnastics of going, I have this idea. No, it's a terrible idea. What are you even doing? You can't write. Oh, well, let's just go. Okay, how about this? Let's go watch a movie. Okay, let's go watch a real filmmaker who can actually tell good stories. Oh, well, they're brilliant. Why am I even doing this? And a week has passed. And you're like, crap, I have nothing. Whereas in a writer's room, you say the idea and you're like, that's a bad idea. They're like, well, I can see why your instinct was to say that, because what about not that, but what about this? Right? And you get that feedback right away and you're like, well, not that. And they're like, well, explain to me why not that. And so to be able to like work with people who can challenge you and who you respect, you can like just move the conversation, move through it faster. So that's what I really loved. And we didn't have a structure where, we would have like a board where we would say, okay, we have to fill out this character. We have to fill out this act. We have to here's the 6 episodes. We know we need the arc to go all the way through. But then other times we'd come in and we would just talk about our day. People would cry, well, my father, I haven't talked to him in 12 years and this is it. And, it would be like therapy. And then somehow that would come and be like, that's perfect. That's actually exactly what we've been looking for Hillary, this character. And what's her, could we, and all of those links come through. And I also found, like, particularly on a series with so many characters and the form is so much longer, to have multiple people's life experiences just gives you more material to put up. And people could argue, and I'd be like, great, let's put that argument into these characters. And so I think having that like diversity of experience, perspective in a room actually helps to make much more interesting characters.
Can I ask you a question? Would you ever use a writer's room for a feature film?
It's funny that you should ask that because I've just started exploring that. Maybe not a full room, but I've been doing, this is a bad term, like a mini room because of the strike or whatever, you're not supposed to. But, you know, there is a, because I have friends of mine that I'm like, you are so good at breaking story, the way their mind works, and they're just like organized. And I'm like, have you thought about turning this into a skill? Because you've been so helpful to me. So I've done this with friends where I take 2 weeks or whatever, and we break the story together. So that way, you know, that's the hardest part is getting where the plot points and then I'll go off and write it. But I think some people do it. They do it on big studio films where they'll bring in people to do like a big Marvel or Disney movie. But I think it should be done more often.
Yeah, it's strange because, you know, I've come up through film, not through TV, so I'd never experienced a writer's room. I was a bit terrified of it. But if you trust the people in it and, you know, get to know people that you gather around you, I mean, it is just a fantastic way to get more material, actually.
Was that your experience in After the Party, or was that still?
Well, I mean, that started in a very, very different way, with Robin and I just deciding that we wanted to collaborate. No idea what the story would be. We did know it was probably going to be about an angry middle-aged woman. That was our starting point. And that wasn't because, you know, it was coming out of our personal experience or anything like that. But
Authenticity comes again.
Yeah. I think we were both a bit angry about different things. And so, yeah, that actually was our starting point. Robin had auditioned for the feature film that I did before and had done such a great audition. And the director had just said no. And cast someone 15 years younger who did a fantastic job, but I hadn't written it for someone 15 years younger. So Robin and I got together to write something, to create something that could only be performed by a middle-aged woman, and that woman would be her. So it was a very different thing, working directly with the actor who was going to play the character. And that was we were just non-negotiable on that. It was not going to be anyone else. It was going to be her. Which was, stepping into the unknown. I mean, it was crazy in a way. But we just sat and talked and told each other stories that we'd heard, that of other people that we knew, things that had happened to them. We just shared stories and in the process got to know each other, got to trust each other, and did that for a very, very long time. And did not worry about structure. Robin claims not to know much about structure, although I think she's got a very deep inherent sense of story. But it was only much later that we applied structure to it. And I must say, I had a great deal of help with that and bringing the structure to it that was necessary for TV to hold tension across the 6 eps. I got a lot of assistance with that. That came through both writers' rooms and through script consultancy, and also with our director, Peter Salmon, who has done great television and was so helpful with that.
So get the right people with their particular gifts around you. Michael, with regard to The Gone, can you tell us about that process of collaborating with a collaborator from overseas, in fact?
Yeah. So with The Gone, it was a real kind of strange development process of how my friend Carl Zoreb had this idea that he'd developed with Simon Nathan, and an Irish production company had got interested. And so Carl said, I'm going to Ireland, do you want to come for a week? And I said, yeah, no, that'd be right. So we sat in a room with the Irish writer Anna McPartlin, And I basically just spend a week kind of talking about, well, you know, I grew up in small town New Zealand. This is set in small town New Zealand. This is the weirdness of the world that I grew up in, and I kept kind of elbowing in as much Māori content as possible, and kind of saying, well, this character's there, but what if we made them Māori? And then what if that then brings us into this kind of level of spirituality or kind of cultural impasse between the Irish and it was kind of like this kind of amazing week where we kind of just discovered that, you know, we've got so many similarities. You know, we're kind of an island of 5 million people, and our biggest city is 1.5 million people. We've both been colonized. We both hate the English. And so it just kind of like was so organic that kind of at the end of the week, Anna, God bless her, said, I can't write this on my own. It's set in New Zealand with all these Māori characters. And so from then on, we were kind of writing it together. And it was just this, it's a really amazing organic process where we're so champions of our own cultures in a way.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you got the Irish character and the Irish detective in the Gone and the Māori detective in the Gone. And it was just like, well, I think the Māori detective should make the big breakthrough next, or the Irish. And so from our elbowing, it just became what I think a lot of co-productions aren't, which is quite often it's like, it could have been an Irish show that just happened to have a few New Zealand characters.
That's right.
Or it could have been a New Zealand show that just happened to have a bit of Irish.
In fact, I was going to ask, was that the original intention, where you have this Irish person with a support character? Because it strikes me that Dianne Huya as a character is quite prominent and quite forceful and really compelling in this series. Yeah. Did that always
I don't know that was the original intention, but certainly with the methodology that we adopted, what it meant was that both cultures, you know, claimed their own ground, and it was very equal storytelling, which doesn't necessarily happen in all co-productions. So it was an amazing process, and yes, like I can only reiterate what everyone has said about the energy of a writing table making, you know, the whole becomes so much more than that.
Fantastic. We have a little bit of time left, so I'm going to race through some of these questions. We have a question about how you develop character, and this is something that you could talk about in terms of the series as a whole, in terms of their development, or just kind of conceiving of them. Dianne, would you like to start with a character? We have Penny, who is at the center of After the Party.
Well, as I said, you know, really that was our starting point, was thinking about the character of Penny. We had that character long before we had a story. She was
always a teacher. She was always...
Yes. We knew that she would be a teacher. I was pretty sure she was a science teacher. Mm-hmm. We knew that she was going to also be a life drawing model, and that she was going to be an eco-activist. I don't know. It's just like, can we put all that into one? Yes, we can. And she'll be some other stuff too. She was going to ride a bike, drink wine and eat cheese. I mean, these things came, Robin just said, oh, you know, sometimes I go home and I'm too tired to cook a meal, so I'll just get a bottle of red wine and a block of cheese out of the fridge. And that stayed in it all the way through. And the number of people that have said to me, oh, I just love the way she went home and just drank wine and ate cheese. And it wasn't even good cheese. It was just like cheese from the fridge. And so things like that stayed in. And
her moral center, like, you know, her sense of justice and morality was really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that we're absolutely certain was that she was going to be very flawed.
Yeah.
You know, this wasn't going to necessarily be a character that everyone would like initially. And when people talked about, you know, your character has to be likable, well, she's not going to be.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, ultimately, I think she is a hugely likable character. And I think a lot of that is actually Robin, bringing Robin to the character. It would be very interesting, you know, casting someone else into that role. There's just so much of Robin in Penny, but, you know, Robin is not Penny. But, it was just stuff that we sort of talked about. I mean, just detail like that. Robin had done life drawing modelling when she was younger to get confidence.
Right.
And we just were very sure that what we wanted was the female, middle-aged female body was going to be quite visible. Mm-hmm. And so she said, well, there's one way to do that. You know, she'll be a life drawing model. So little by little, you build these things in.
Fantastic. Lulu, when you adapted Expatriates, which became Expats, you had a character, an actress also, which is something in common with Dianne, in mind. Can you talk about your approach to character and developing that character?
Yeah, I think for us, because we really saw it as a three-hander, that there were these three women, and it's a show that interrogates privilege, but of all kinds, you know, class and race. And similarly, we didn't want to make any of them the hero and, the one who had no flaws and then the one who was likable or anything like that. And so we just were constantly shifting the dynamics. We were like, okay, what is the relationship between these two women and these two women? And how do we continue to develop, like you might like this character in this episode, but then we would undercut it by something else happening in the second episode that makes you really dislike them. And so you might feel sorry for them because, you know, they're growing up dark-skinned in a culture that's quite racist, and the relationship with the mom or the best friend who doesn't treat them very well. But then in the next episode, she's treating, the woman who works for her very poorly. And so people, I think, are made of all of these different facets. And so for us, it was just constantly, and we would look at somebody and go, wow, that character, all they are is good. Can we give them more? Yeah.
Fantastic. Michael.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I'm really drawn to characters organically emerging from the ether a little bit. It's part of my process. I think it's a little bit like, you know, for me, that early dream stage and the stuff on the wall, at a certain point, it starts to become a little bit about like that first ultrasound of your baby, that, you know, out of the gloggy kind of embryonic mass of cells, a bit of a spinal thing starts to emerge, and which is quite a moment. And to me, like, that's part of the process, is letting that spine emerge. I mean, what I do know is that, like, once the spine is starting to solidify and, you know, you've got the 8-month ultrasound and you kind of know what it's looking like, then it's about giving authenticity to that. Like, for instance, the next project that I'm doing is the main character's late 30s Māori female cop. And, you know, as the writer, I'm only one of the above. So then it becomes really important to get back to the story table. You know, my story table has late 30 Māori women on it, has cops on it, has, you know, the flesh that you put around the spine to make it authentic. It has to come from a place of knowledge, which is not just your imagination. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have left. We had some questions that I believe were answered as part of the conversation. It leaves me to thank Michael Bennett, Lulu Wang, and the great Dianne Taylor. Thank you for your humanity, for your insights, and let's give them Homai Te Paku to everybody. Thank you, Marc.
The Big Screen Symposium 2024 was presented by Script to Screen. We gratefully thank our event partners, the New Zealand Film Commission, Images and Sound, New Zealand On Air, and Te Mangai Paho. Voiceover is by Jamie Irvine, and the music is by Poddington Bear. You can read more about these speakers at our website, www.bigscreensymposium.com. This podcast is brought to you thanks to generous support from Images and Sound.